very warm welcome to Fireside Chats. I am Magela Pillai, and today we will be taking up the subject of being true to yourself. In this series, we look at a variety of subjects surrounding spirituality, what it is, what it means to you, how it impacts on your personal, your family, your professional life. We look at what your relationship with God is and how you can take your relationship with God to a deeper and more meaningful level. I'd like to introduce you to Sister Denise, an experienced practitioner of Rajyoga Meditation. Sister Denise, a very warm welcome to today's show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Being true to yourself. As simple as that sounds, I think there are millions across the globe who have a problem in this department. Let's start at the beginning. How does a child or an adult get to know who they really are?
I think people have a lot of difficulty with this because the external moral authorities, the parents, the teachers, the religious leaders usually give messages to the children to the effect that whatever it is they are from the inside is somehow not okay. And they will tell them, don't be like that, you have to be like this, you can't be like this, you have to be like that, so that the inner urge of what you are and who you are gets either squashed or distorted or something, so that the child is actually disconnected from the real self in the name of conventional morality and so on. And then pretty soon the child no longer has access to that. Or many people experience different kinds of traumas, different kinds of violations, different sorts of violence, which also disconnects a person from the true self, because you get pushed into having to cope with a situation that is really unhealthy, and then you develop coping mechanisms which subsequently become character defects. So the work of getting back to yourself can be quite a big piece of work.
Sister Denise, how do you begin this process of self-discovery?
I think that there has to be something in your life which tells you that the way your life has been going so far is somehow hollow or empty or painful or uncomfortable, or it doesn't have meaning, or it doesn't correspond to something within yourself. And then this awareness actually causes the person to try to find out who they are and what they are. And they may try all sorts of different ways, and hopefully eventually they can arrive at the self.
It can't possibly be a day's work, can it? There's a lot of energy that needs to be put into rediscovering yourself. And the image that comes to mind when I say this is an onion. It's almost as if human beings are locked inside or underneath layers and layers and layers of I'm not sure what.
Yes, I think that for a lot of people, actually possibly even we could say for most people, your whole life's work is to find yourself. And if you are lucky enough to receive validation for who you are from the beginning, then of course that's not so difficult, not so painful. But then for some people who have been invalidated from the beginning, that can be a really big job. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, Sister Denise, learning to discover the self is one thing, and then being true to yourself is the second part of that. What does it mean, not just theoretically, but in reality?
Well, you know, one thing is that when you get born, it's not necessarily the first time around. most people actually reincarnate quite a bit. And so that by the time you are born in this life, there's been a lot of things to actually make you untrue to yourself. And so when you start in this life, you're dealing with the things of this life, but you're also having to deal with accumulated forms of falsehood from perhaps former lifetimes. So, to really find the true self is very deep. And it is a spiritual journey. There's only one being who knows who you are, and that's God.
We draw our identities from many sources, from things and from people, mainly from parents, and then siblings, and then religion and culture, and also this. How much of that is real? And by real I mean permanent. How much of that is permanent?
Well, anything that is material is impermanent. So what the spiritual knowledge says is you are a soul, you are not material, and all the things that are around you that are material, that tell you that you are this, they are not really telling you the truth. So to, pass through all those layers and find the realness, the trueness about yourself involves going really very deep inside. So the essential quality of a self is you're pure, you're loving, you're peaceful, you're powerful, you have value, you have meaning, you belong to God, you have a purpose. And so you have to get in touch with that. And then in the state of connectedness with your inner being, engage in the day-to-day world at all times with this idea of being true to that inner being, you see. And the thing that prevents you mostly is what we call the false ego. Someone will tell you, well, you belong to this family, and this is your status in society, and this is your importance, and this is how you can expect to be treated, and then sometimes it plays out like that, but very often there are many things that happen that are not pre-planned, you can say, and a person will find themselves sooner or later really living a lie. And so the this famous Shakespeare quote that is often used, "To thine own self be true," comes from a father telling his son what he needs to know before he sets off to foreign countries where he's going to have to really look after himself. So in a way, it's at the point where a person starts to take care of themselves, they become mature, they become adult, and so, okay, now what do I do? Well, the first thing you have to do is to be real, is to be true to yourself. And so it's not something that you really do as a child, it's something that you need to do as you step into adulthood, as you step into responsibilities, as you become responsible for yourself.
Yes, Denise, I want to look at a classic example of one of the things that unfolds in the world today. Marriage. Somebody who's 20 differs in mind and in character from somebody who's the same person, changes from 20 to 25, and thereafter 25 to 30, and thereafter 30 to 35. So if you, for example, fall in love with somebody when you're 21 and believe that this is the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, and then eventually end up marrying that person at, say, 26 or 27, one can wake up at 35 and think, oh my God, what have I done? Okay, it's the case that because people undergo so much of change through in your 20s, that you become somebody that you don't necessarily recognize in your 30s. So if you make promises to somebody in your 20s, it's a lot of people find it difficult to keep those promises in their 30s. My point is, they're being true to who they are at the time, and then that truth changes.
Well, you could say that, but there are other factors involved. When you fall in love with somebody, there is a physical attraction going on. And from a spiritual angle, what would be said is there's a karmic account coming along to be settled. And the karmic account initiates as an attraction, and the people bond, maybe have a child, 2 children, and then the actual settlement of karma begins, where the whole thing turns around. And that is not really anything to do with being true to yourself or not true to yourself. It's another factor which is nothing to do with it.
Okay.
But you have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so I think being true to yourself is not the same thing as being attracted to another person, because you're attracted to another person, so you're attracted, you have feelings. Now, if you're very wise and very far-sighted, you will make your relationship based on a lot of things other than physical attraction. If you operate only on the basis of physical attraction, then it means that you only know yourself at a very superficial level. So you're not really being true to yourself, you're just being true to your feelings of the moment, but yourself is a lot deeper than that. So, you know, when you're talking about...
hold on. Say that again. You're only being?
Well, if you're being true to your feelings, you're true to yourself only at a very superficial level.
Ah, yes. So that means you being... your awareness of yourself is superficial.
That's right.
Okay.
And so you can't really be true to yourself if you don't know what yourself is, if you haven't made contact with yourself at a much deeper level. And you see, you know, life, you mentioned, you go through a lot of changes every 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is. But the whole thing of life is you're making a lot of discoveries. And when you get married, you're entering into a contract. And when you enter into that contract as a young person, you really don't have too much idea what's involved. So as you move forward in your life, you start finding out that things are not quite so easy as you thought, they're not quite so straightforward as you thought, and that you require a lot more strength, wisdom, and so on in order to do the things that come up later in life. And you know, that's why there are many societies in which the question of marriage is not that you just get married to a person and that's a matter of your loving that person. You come from a family and you marry into another family, and those families come together. It's not just 2 people coming together. You may have children, they'll be cousins, all sorts of things. So the whole community, the society, will take some responsibility and also guide you and also keep you within limits. Then there are other societies, many of the circumstances of what we call the Western society, where it's just an individual getting married to another individual and is a little bit disconnected from the families. not in all cases, but in many cases. And a lot of times that happens also when the person's connection with the family is quite tenuous, you see. And so then it becomes just one soul and another soul and their karmic accounts, no guidance, no context other than just their feelings, you see. So that's a very different situation. But even then, that's the situation for many people. I think it's really when things start going wrong that you start trying to find out, okay, now what is this thing called life and what's involved? What are the qualities I need to have? And when you start to, learn a spiritual practice, that's also in the context of you have your family, you have your work, all of these things. So you're looking at a number of different dimensions in your life. And I think one of the aspects of being true to yourself is to be making sure that you're aligned in your inner life, your family life, your professional life, your community life. All of those things line up. Then I would say you're being true to yourself.
It's become quite commonplace for people to be superficial, even though they may not acknowledge to themselves that they are superficial. How would you define superficiality? Because it's one of those states that one becomes without even knowing that you get there or how you got there.
Well, superficial is to live on the surface of your body. You're just operating on the basis of sense perceptions. You're not concerned with meaning, purpose, deeper things, long-term consequences, like that. And of course, we live in a very materialistic world, which is telling people to live on a very superficial level, because that way you can just be a consumer and give them all your money. But once you start getting a little bit of depth, then your life is not about getting stuff. It's more about being something.
That's a very interesting terminology that you used, to live on the surface of your body. Say more about that. I've never heard that before. So the soul's awareness is on its skin?
Skin.
Skin?
Skin deep.
Okay.
You're seeing everything at the surface level. You're not looking deep, you're not looking behind. You're just looking at superficial appearances. If it feels good, do it. If it feels bad, it's bad. That kind of thing. A lot of people live that way. But there's no depth. There's no substance. And sooner or later you find that your life is just, a veneer.
And that's a very heavy price to pay, isn't it? Because you're not superficial, but you've chosen to become superficial.
Well, you might not even have made a conscious choice. You might have just kind of fallen into it. I think choice comes when you realize that you are superficial and you choose to look beneath the surface, and maybe what you see is not so nice, but you need to go down there and find out what is the stuff of which you are made. And there is where you start to really become true to yourself, because you would realize to what extent you have been false to yourself by being superficial.
So Denise, to what extent does life become a mirror to show you who you are? How does life come to your assistance to reveal to you who you are?
Well, I don't know whether it really does. I think to find out who you are, life is more like a backdrop, and finding out who you are is really an internal journey, and an observation of yourself, how you operate in different circumstances. We have this expression, I know who you are. That means I know what are the deeper motivations that are driving a person, whether they're honest, whether they're not honest, whether they're clean, pure, or whether they have a very different agenda from what is being presented. It's more like going behind the surface appearances.
You mentioned God earlier. How does he come to the assistance of somebody who is interested in self-discovery to your essence or to your core?
Well, I don't know whether God really comes to your assistance. A person says, I don't know what my life is about. They start to look for themselves, look into themselves, look beneath the surface. They start to question what life's all about. It is quite likely that as they go deep, the question of the existence of God, their relationship with God, will arise in their mind, you know. And sooner or later, I think a person has to answer this question for themselves: do I believe there is a God? And a lot of people who look deep and ask themselves this question give the answer no, and they go back to the surface. So maybe something else has to happen. They go a little bit deeper. But I do feel that when a person starts to think seriously about their relationship with God and starts to line up their life in accordance with their understanding of God, that is a very important part of the process of being true to the self, because then, you know, you be true to the self, you also be true to God, and then you've got some good alignments going on there.
There is a deep need in humanity to experience what is called a feeling of belonging to people. How does knowing oneself and knowing who you really are form part and parcel of that picture? Because we tend to gravitate towards like-minded people, and if you don't know you're superficial if you're surrounded by people who think and behave and act like you do.
Well, this desire to belong is because when you feel comfortable in a group of people, that group will also reflect back to you. And if you don't belong, what those people reflect back to you doesn't really do much for you. And then maybe you will say, okay, well, you know, I don't belong here. Where do I belong? So yes, you're looking for like-minded people because you want something reflected back to you that helps you to see yourself. And very often how you see yourself is quite different from how other people see you. And it's actually quite rare to find a person who sees themselves as they are. And I think that if you are surrounded by, you know, quite a lot of people, you have a better chance to get that kind of a reflection which will reflect back to you what you are, you know. If you're only with just a few people, you'll get something that's a bit skewed, but if it's a generally representative group, yeah, it'll come back to you what you are.
So, Sister Denise, unfortunately we've come to the end of this. This is such a fascinating topic. It's worth spending another couple of hours chatting about it. But Sister Denise, for somebody who's watching you right now, who's keenly interested in discovering the real I, could you share some last words?
You know, you can actually kind of feel yourself from the inside. You look at yourself in the mirror, you look at yourself through how a camera records you, you'll see something. But when you try and go deep on the very, very deepest part of yourself and see what's there, that is also going to show you something that those who see the surface of you will not reflect back to you. So that's a very important journey to make.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us, and we have to say goodbye to you right now, unfortunately. So there you go, the subject of being true to yourself. I'm of the view that this is the foundational effort that any human being should make in one's life, whether you embark on a spiritual journey or not. And Sister Denise has beautifully shared how one can achieve self-discovery by taking the time and putting in the effort to know yourself. Obviously, you're worth it. Sister Denise has also shared how one can gain the assistance of God in one's journey of self-discovery. And I do like the warning, although it may be difficult to hear, that if you're superficial and if you have a superficial understanding of who you are at certain points in your life, you pay a very heavy price for being like that. So a warning, but a sweet one, and I do wish you everything of the best on your own spiritual journey. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.